And welcome into PressBox Live. I'm Stan the Fan Charles of PressBox and PressBoxOnline.com. And Gary Stein has the night off tonight. Got two very special guests I'll get to in just a moment. Got to remind you that PressBox Live is brought to you by C3 American Exteriors. Go to their website at c3america.com to get a brand new roof for just the cost of your insurance deductible. And these two guests are longtime friends of mine and two esteemed members of the sports business community. Andy Dolich is with us from the left coast. Andy, how are you?
I'm great, and I haven't been called esteemed probably ever, so I thank you for that, Stan.
Should I have called you steamed?
I have been steamed at times now. Marty Conway, that's esteemed. That's
all right. That is esteemed. But anyway, Andy has worked in all four major sports in his illustrious career in sports business. He's worked for the Memphis Grizzlies in the NBA, also the Philadelphia 76ers, the Oakland A's, the Washington Capitals, and San Francisco 49ers. And I failed to mention did I mention the Grizzlies? Memphis Grizzlies?
The Vancouver
Grizzlies,
the last team to move across an international border in North America, and the incredible Washington Diplomats of the old North American soccer.
Forgot about them, yeah.
One of the great nicknames, the Dips. What moron thought of that? And the famous Maryland Arrows of the National Lacrosse League.
And
now I'm the chief operating officer of fan-controlled football that's sweeping the country.
All right, well, we'll find out a little bit about that. But Andy, a longtime friend, as is Marty Conway. Andy, by the way, on the left coast, teaches sports business at Stanford. Marty Conway, who has only worked that I can remember for two teams, Baltimore Orioles and the Texas Rangers. Although, did you work for the Syracuse Chiefs in the minor leagues?
I did. That was my first job, certainly, but we're going back to when I could first get a paycheck.
You know? I know.
Stan, I think it is a standard today. I'll only speak for myself, not for Marty, but neither of us could get into the stuff that we're teaching. Our lives.
Oh my goodness, Andy, when I was doing more college basketball, I used to text my friends from the gym at Princeton or Penn or somebody and say, you'll never believe where I am, because never believe. So yeah, we only teach at institutions that we could not even ever consider getting a whiff of. So how does that work?
All right. And Marty's also a longtime college basketball referee. I'm going to start the question on a little bit of an oddball thing. I was thinking about it today while I was doing my walk, is when you guys were the age that most people are your students right now, was there anybody teaching what you now teach, sports business? And Marty, I was is at Georgetown University teaching sports business. Were there sports business classes being taught in the 60s?
Well, Marty is half my age, so I'll go first.
Well, I figured that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Andy.
I would say, if you can believe it, and Marty will update, today, Stan, there are close to 400 schools in North America that are teaching some level of sports business, either on a master's level or undergrad. At the time, I was at American University, and I think I've told this story. Walter O'Malley, owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers, had this vision that sports was going to be a big deal. Like it was more than just 8 people in the front office. There was no marketing for teams. And Walter was going to start a program at Columbia University until the Dodgers weren't at Brooklyn anymore. The program never got started. The number 2 guy at Columbia ends up at Ohio University in Athens. And he calls up O'Malley and voila, in the late 60s, the first program in sports management is created at Ohio University, not exactly the bastion of
Right.
sports. And I was in one of the first classes, and the level of quality, and Georgetown's one of the finer programs in the country. I'd leave it to Marty to bring you up to speed with how incredible the level of education has grown over the last few years.
Well, Marty, I know if I'm not mistaken, your first job in sports was working in minor league baseball because you lived sort of close by. So did you take sports marketing in school? Is that something you
No,
wanted to
gosh,
do?
no. When I left, undergraduate school, there were three programs to apply to. You mentioned Ohio University, which I thought for sure was Ohio State. I had no idea there even was an Ohio University.
And today they still think it's Ohio State.
UMass, University of Massachusetts, and a fledgling program at Western Illinois University, and that was it. And so, yeah, when I got the call to get an interview to the program at Ohio University, getting in my car to make the drive, again, I totally thought I was going to Columbus and found out that it's in Athens. And I was like that early foreign correspondent, who goes to a place that he doesn't know anything about. And, but once you get, so, I mean, there were three, Stan, to answer your direct question. And now Andy's right. There's close to 400, probably give or take, and at all levels. But at that point, you had very few choices. And but it's better now that there's a lot more. The industry obviously has exploded, and we are where we are.
So we hear the
How
word.
amazing, Dan, if you just look at the way things work, it was 51 or 52 years later that Columbia started their program in sports.
After the thing with him. Now, did O'Malley like endow the program at Ohio University? Was there some connection?
Endowment at that time was like $187. I mean,
right. Okay. So
here's what he did. The guy's name was James Mason, and James Mason was a guy from Columbia, and he was a go-getter. He just got a commitment from O'Malley that the Dodgers would take however few graduates, would send them to Albuquerque, their team in Albuquerque, to do their internships. That was the deal.
So is the area now, we hear the term sometimes undervalued, or is it overvalued? In other words, are there way too many kids studying sports business now to really fit in where there are jobs?
I'll turn to Marty to answer that one first.
Well, if you ask Mark Cuban, he says for sure that there's really no reason or no rationale for sports marketing. And in addition to sport, so there's close to 400 programs. Now, keep in mind that doesn't include places in the Ivy League or other Division III places where we're getting general managers from who majored in behavioral economics and other things like that. So it's no longer a predicate to get in. But again, we're talking about more than just 5 major leagues with 150 teams. We're talking about agencies and minor league baseball and a number of other things. So no matter whether there was 3 programs or 333, there was always more job seekers at the minor league baseball winter meetings than there were jobs. So I think that's always been the case.
Marty, how many colleges and universities today have some sort of financial assistance for e-gaming scholarships?
It's a good question. We're probably approaching 50 at the moment because it's not connected to the NCAA. Georgetown actually has a program now. And so I think that number will likely double or triple, certainly within 10 years.
What department is it under? Is it under technology or?
Well, it varies.
Computer sciences?
Yeah, no, it varies. In our case, it's actually run by somebody who used to be at Ohio State, who is in, I don't know, the chief operator's office or something like that. So they've kept it out of the athletics department. So it varies. Some of them actually it's in the athletics department and other places, but again, it's not connected to the NCAA in any way. So it's sort of like a club program in a way that they can have the ability to not have the regulation that the NCAA rule book, which is, phone book thick, sort of goes with.
In answer to your question, Stan, are there too many programs and are some of them tuition robbers for the kids? Absolutely, without question. That being the case, there is a global need for quality business people. And I was just talking to an entrepreneur who's going to buy, in his mind, smaller third or fourth division European soccer teams and put quality management organizations in place. Where's he going to get those young people with a sense of adventure? To get them from sports management programs.
Right.
And so there's so much opportunity, even though we're living through the age of COVID-19, and a lot of these young people have been furloughed or fired. But they, I don't know what Marty's first salary was. Mine at the Sixers in 72 was 4,300 beans, $4,300.
I'll tell you, mine was
And
$20,000.
that was no money.
Mine was $20,000, but I was living and working in New York City, so it might as well have been $4,500 to do that.
What was your first job, Marty, in sports?
I was I was part of an it was called the Executive Development Program in Major League Baseball, where they would take 3 people per year, 2 or 3 people per year, after rounds and rounds of interviews, with the idea that they would then sort of train them in a more global Major League Baseball viewpoint instead of coming up through the teams, and then farm them out. And there were a number of people that predated me into that program. And so I was very fortunate to get selected. My other 2 colleagues at the time, one went on from there to work for Coca-Cola and the Milwaukee Brewers. And then ultimately the other one actually went on to run the Brewers because it was Wendy Seelig. So that was my class. To come back, just to finish up that thought and what Andy was talking about in terms of the globalization nature, having opportunity to have taught in Qatar and Ukraine and some other places, I can tell you, outside of the US and maybe some parts of Western Europe, sports business is not taught. It's just not. It's sports performance, sports coaching, sort of, all those other elements of coaching and getting the best out of our athletes, but sports business as a profile. And that's why you see games in Brazil and Ukraine where there's no marketing, there's no promotion, whatever. Now they're understanding they need to do that. So that's where the next phase.
And you look at colleagues that Marty and I, grew up with in the business that are working in the EPL, that are working in South America, that have gone all over the world because they're adventurous, they're not afraid, and their skills are necessary. Because, as Marty said, they're just not teaching that, and just playing the game isn't enough.
So there's so many places I wanted to go tonight, but I did want to, because we somehow got into talking a little bit about soccer. Soccer still is not what it is in Europe and other places in the world, in the United States. But, and I think because of that, we might not have an understanding of it. But is owning one of the large soccer franchises like Man U or something, that is equivalent to owning the New York Yankees or the Dallas Cowboys, isn't it? It's that big a business over there.
Well, the Yankees might be half the business of some of those teams. I mean, Marty looks at it. I would just give you a very simple answer. My son works for the Portland Timbers and the Portland Thorns. People don't know the Portland Thorns. It's the women's team. They're the most successful women's sports professional franchise in North America. They average 20,000 a game. They have 10,000 season tickets. John Garber has done a magnificent job, in my view, of growing the MLS. You look at the money that's now being spent for expansion franchises, and the Portland Timbers and the Portland Thorns just did the first deal that I know of to have TikTok on their uniform buds for a nice chunk of change, because that's where young people are looking these days.
Yeah, I think you mentioned those areas, Stan. Manchester City has now 5 or 6 clubs that they affiliate with around the world. They have almost a farm system. Manchester United, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich. The point being there is they are borderless. Their leagues do not prevent them, give them any restriction to going to other countries, monetizing their assets, sponsorships, and all that. Unlike the NFL and the NBA and others, where you're confined to a territory, the league has much more control. Those franchises can be as global as they want to be. And so that's what has created this opportunity.
Look at Andy. Look at that. Always
See,
the
I'm not
marketing
very
man.
bright, but I got stuff.
You do got
This is
stuff.
why soccer, because there's somebody playing in South Sudan right now.
Right.
Grow up to be Pele, Messi, Ronaldo, and there's somebody in the United States that is going that way too. So
Yeah.
you can be a star in this without having a 4-year ride to any college and be one of the biggest athletes on the face of the globe.
So the reason I called both of you is the other night, I knew I was long overdue for doing a catch up with you guys and talking about the post pandemic or in the middle of the pandemic, whatever, wherever we are. But I noticed a story on ESPN that the Australian Open lost $78 million. Is that real dollars that they lost, or was it money that they didn't accumulate?
I think it's more the latter, Stan, which is now there's two things about it, right? In this new COVID world, and I don't think we're halfway, frankly. I don't think we're closer to the end than the beginning. We'll see.
Yep.
But it's a combination of the additional cost of deciding to run the Australian Open or what will be the Olympics in a few months or Wimbledon or anything like that. The additional costs are staggering. Getting players in quarantine, testing, protocols. So there's a combination of that and the limited capacities and the limited merchandising and opportunities and things like that. When you put those two together, I think you're looking at more the $75 million, not necessarily a loss. It's a loss from previous levels to do that. And I think that's what most organizations are beginning to understand is putting those things together. What is that additional cost? Plus, what am I losing in terms of revenue that I no longer have access to?
What would the Australian Open have lost if they had just said, we know we're not going to make any money this year, so we're just not going to have the Australian Open? Is that too risky for a keystone event like such
Well,
as that?
Marty just referenced it with the Olympics. It's on,
Yeah.
it's off, it's on, it's off.
Right.
Once you lose momentum with an event that is global, it's not easy to bring it back. So having it done the way they did it, and Australia, we all have friends in Australia, they are as professional and as locked down, no pun intended, as any place on the face of the globe in terms of doing it. And as we look at all sports, we'll turn to baseball, but if you don't have a bubble in today's day and age,
yeah,
you've got a problem. I mean, the other night, right here in this market, the Sharks came back after, being told to leave Santa Clara County like the Niners and like all the other teams. They came back and Thomas Hurdle got COVID and the next few games are called off. So to Marty's point, nobody really knows what's going to happen. And I think the smartest person in sports in the last year or so is the guy at Wimbledon who took out an insurance policy. Right, Marty? I think he's the only guy in all of major sport that went, what would happen? And boom.
Yeah. Whatever premium. So you're talking about Wimbledon last year did not hold it, but had a really good force majeure, a clause in their insurance policy. And so whatever they were paying for premiums for the previous 8, 10, 12, 15 years, he or she were the only ones to be able to figure that out and to hold that over. Now, again, I think now they go forward with, look, we can understand this more, right? We can understand protocols. We can understand distancing, quarantining, different things like that. Those were not possible last summer and early fall. Now we understand it, and they can make some decisions in terms of what Stan and Andy were talking about is maintaining that momentum and maintaining your place on the sports calendar. If you remember last year, we restarted a bunch of events in September and October. And I think at one point in 1 month, we had 500 global events just in 1 month.
Yeah.
There's about 2,500 of those over the course of a year and that are stretched out over 12 months.
Right. So, think about the Rudy Gobert domino. That's what I use, and how the world changed at March 10th or 11th. And I did something the other day just because I follow COVID pretty closely in the numbers. If you took each of these NBA cities individually, not together and not their giant 400-mile area, Miami, Minnesota, New Orleans, Cleveland, Orlando, Salt Lake City, Oakland, if it had the Warriors, Newark, St. Paul, Sacramento. If Marty was the head of business for those teams and his owner came in and said, Marty, I want you to start selling next year, Marty would unfortunately say, well, boss, every single person in our city is dead.
Yeah.
Every single person in and when you think about it that way, no, that can't be right. You can't say like, what do you mean everybody in Cleveland's dead? Yes, the city doesn't exist anymore. So I know that's apocalyptic, but to a certain extent, it's real.
So from the mundane to the ridiculous or vice versa, baseball, do you guys both think that they made a mistake in how they're doing the scheduling this year? Should they have confined the first half of the season to the corridors that they had last year? Is it more risky to be traveling for the Orioles to go out to Anaheim and up to Seattle and then to Minnesota rather than just staying in shorter flights and things like that?
I would take that first. Look, I think if Rob Manfred could have said, I'm making all the rules and this is what we're doing, he might have done something like that. I think the players put them in a position where they essentially couldn't. The players were saying, not all protocols be damned, but we want to play a full season because we want full salaries. And there was just no accommodation there between, can we come up with something that's 135 or 145 or whatever number of games, and we can figure this out with, type travel. I think when it finally came down to mid to late February to make that decision, it was, we either got to consider 162 and figure it out when we have a series of problems. My take was, I don't think the players really gave them a place to go. And I think they forced them into, here's a full season, and then we're just going to have to figure it out on a month-by-month basis.
They
And
called
Stan, you're going to blame the person who owns this ball. You're not going to blame the person that plays with this ball. So to Mark's point about owners versus players, what was the dynamic that the media saw? Major League Baseball, labor interruption, this project, and Adam Silver's out there creating bubbles, and Don Garber is bringing soccer back, and Roger Goodell is spraying this and spraying that. And then, to me, what makes my head explode, you're going to kill your laboratory, meaning minor league baseball.
Yeah.
Going to take 40 of your most prominent laboratories that creates the Marty Conways and others in the world, and you're going to say, well, those 40 teams are gone, and the hell with those young families that can't afford Major League Baseball but love minor league baseball. Let's whack them and screw up our relationship with minor league baseball.
Yeah, well, that's definitely happened. I mean, that's what Manfred wanted, and that's what he's got right now. There are probably too many minor league players playing minor league baseball, though, that are just trying to keep their dream alive. Isn't that the case, though?
Well, look, I think there's some element to that, but look, anytime you have a team of 5 NBA players or basketball players or 11 football players or baseball, whatever that number is, you need certain players so other players can play, right? And so we need first baseman to catch the ball so that Manny Machado can throw it across the diamond. That first baseman doesn't have to be the next prospect. He just has to be able to catch Manny's, balls when he throws it. And I think to Andy's point, look, I grew up in minor league baseball. That was my first opportunity. Fortunately, the team that I grew up with is still there because the New York Mets bought the franchise to stabilize it. But I think this is a colossal mistake. And I don't think they have a plan for it. And what I mean by that is, okay, now you've cut 40 teams. I always say to people, can you imagine if the NFL had what minor league baseball is, or the NBA had what minor league baseball is? Can you imagine what they would have done with it, with the opportunity to develop fans and engage and all this other kind of stuff? This was a gift to Major League Baseball that somehow a group of folks in analytics said, I think we can basically create players in a laboratory somewhere and bring them up at some level to do it, losing sight of the fact that on every night from April 1st to late September, there was a baseball game being played somewhere in every state in our country, literally. And why did they decide to give that up? Obviously, there were some folks in the room who said, well, here's what the numbers look like, and we can do this. in a laboratory with pitching mounds and different things like that. And they lost the trees, they lost the forest for the trees.
Marty, how many great ideas that you were given credit for? If you take, steal, filch, borrow from minor league baseball.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so proud of dot racing for minor league baseball. This thing, Crazy George, minor league baseball, and on and on and on. The stuff that you did with the Orioles and others.
Yeah.
So, and that is just, it's mind numbing that you had a free laboratory, almost the Silicon Valley marketing, promotion, and forget just the players, some of whom turn into all-stars after a while because the analytical metricists don't know what they're doing or make a mistake.
Won't they say as an industry, though, that the reason they did it really was because a lot of the parks, that the 40 that are going out of, they're not so much going out of business, they're disappearing, but they didn't keep up the facilities, the workout facilities for players. They didn't make them more friendly toward them.
If Marty Conway owned 10 McDonald's franchises and one of them wasn't doing well, he'd figure out how to get the 10th franchise to do better and to rehabilitate it and to rebuild it. And the amount of money, I mean, Marty looks at these, not the amount of money of those 40 franchises is mouse meat in terms of larger amount of money.
Yeah, I think we're talking about, as we would say in the Twitter world, hashtag first world problems, right? The fact that a minor league stadium in somewhere in Maryland or California isn't a standard. I'd be happy to show them pictures of the dirt streets of Brazil and Argentina, where kids are learning to play football, the kind of football you actually play with your feet, to do that and to say, you know what, we really need to get these kids on some AstroTurf with lights and to do that. So this idea that they weren't up to standard, I just say, yeah, first world problems. Like if that was baseball's biggest problem, which it isn't, then if they would have put the same amount of time, effort, and commitment around figuring out marketing their best players, I think they'd be farther ahead.
And look at the demographics of baseball. Look at those players. Look at the great African-American athletes. Look at where players are coming from in Latin America, Central America, Asia.
Yeah.
If you are not growing up with baseball, you're not buying season tickets.
Right. They've chopped off some future fans, no question about it.
Yeah, the facilities in the Dominican were no better than the fields in Bluefield, West Virginia, and it didn't keep those kids from playing and the sport to thrive.
So what happens to these franchises, the stadiums, and the players? Where will they're not just going to disappear. There's going to be something new started, isn't there?
Yes, fan-controlled football is going to create a new fan-controlled baseball in the next 2 years. I'm being somewhat facetious, but
you're being somewhat serious.
3.5 hours long. It doesn't really talk to young kids today in terms of how they're doing things, especially if there's no Little League because of COVID, or that minor league team that they loved and that mascot that they cuddled with every game, and that they could go have dinner there for $12, not $400 at a major league park. Somebody will monetize it because it's entertainment and it's affordable and make it work.
Yep, I think that's right. I think baseball is relying on somebody else to do the work and to carry most of that cost. And ultimately, it may be where they create more competition for themselves as opposed to a system that can support them. So we'll see.
So one of the things that's Maryland is on the cusp, Marty, as you know, and Andy, I'm sure you probably read it. We're going to have legalized sports betting probably by August or September. Right. Might even be a little sooner, or it could get snowballed by the legislature and be into early next year. But how big is this now to sports, the sports betting? How much money is there out there? Can you even stack it up and count it? I mean,
I'll go crazy first, and then I'll defer to somebody who's much more reasoned than I. So 2 Super Bowls ago, $5.2 billion were bet on the game. How much of it legal, basically 2%, right? 2%. Now, of that $5 billion in 2 years, how much is the Players Association getting? That would be zero. How much are the owners getting? That would be zero. How much is the network getting? That would be zero. What about the feds, the state, the county, the stadium authority, the most valuable player? What are they getting? Zero. So until that starts to filter down to those entities, like everybody's talking about, this will completely revolutionize the game. I want to hear what Marty says, but I think it's going to be a while.
Yeah, I think, well, there's some divisions to understand, right? That there's the actual gambling themselves, but what's going to influence immediately is the on-premise providers of that becoming sponsors and becoming media partners. And so there's that element. Now, I think the NFL here is poised to do something. I don't know anything particularly on the inside, except from some conversations that as they announce new media deals over the next few weeks, remember in 2010, Roger Goodell pronounced that to the owners, that he could triple their revenues by 2027. And they are darn close. That would have been $25 billion by 2027. And I think they're going to be darn close. And it's going to come from new media deals, but it's also going to come from some combination of sport betting that infuses media deals and to do that. But Andy's point is right. Until they actually get a piece and a component of the actual transaction, because if you follow sports betting around the world, you'll go to a tennis event and there'll be some people sitting in the stands, you won't know who they are, that are transmitting information to people ahead of time, because by the time you actually see that event on television, that was 30 seconds ago to do that. So the players are actually creating this data set, this data stream, and until there's a scenario where they're going to get a piece of it, I think it's going to look like big money, but it's really going to be superficial. It's going to be sponsorship and media and elements like that.
Marty, can you give us a minute or two of insight into Monumental and what they're doing at the facility to basically explain that?
That's a good question.
Before the money is coming from the actual bets.
So in DC, they have allowed, depending on where these licenses go, in DC, they're going to have some parlor betting, but they haven't opened any. But the facilities themselves, Capital One Arena now has a sports book. William Hill, Caesars, Nats Park is going to work with MGM. DC United is going to have their own, et cetera. And so they've created a lounge area. So the actual take from the sports betting will be a smaller component as opposed to the money from food and beverage and tickets and all the elements to do that. So they've integrated that into the formal Green Turtle. And so that's where it's going to come from. But again, eventually there has to be some sort of component of the actual legalized betting themselves. So right now they're monetizing it through traditional formats, which are kind of restaurants and book and parlors and things like that. But where the real money is going to come from is when there's a component of what's actually bet.
Right. So and Stan, you're always going to have the apocalypse of Tim Donaghy. People worried that the amount of money will destroy credibility of their sport.
Yeah. You know, the other night I was watching the Caps Penguins game, and it seemed like every ad was William Hill Sportsbook. They own the broadcast. And one of the ads was particularly interesting to something I'm working on now. So I went online, I Googled William Hill Sportsbook TV ads, and I didn't see the ad I was looking for, but either of you seen the Pete Rose ad for William Hill Sportsbook?
Yeah, I have.
You have seen it?
No.
Yeah.
Google it and watch it, Andy. It's very, I mean, I'm not shocked. No, it's almost like Donald Trump. I'm not shocked with anything that Pete Rose does, but that he would loan himself to this for his punchline, it was kind of fascinating.
Well, I think the larger pool of money in the immediate future is naming on every part of uniforms, naming divisions for corporations, naming leagues. Can you imagine if the NBA or the NFL said, yeah, we're going to sell our name to a corporate entity? Holy.
I mean, is that what's going to happen with minor league baseball, with the names, the International League, the Pacific Coast League disappearing? Are they going to get the corporate names?
I mean, if there's no PCL, which has only had 90 years of history, like, yeah, I'll sell it to Tesla or Google
Right.
or someone else. And you just think about the global aspect that we talked about. Companies are spending money around the world, and sports still has an attraction to those eyeballs and pockets.
Yeah.
All right. Because we're running late right now, so I want to kind of wrap this up over the next 5 minutes or so. Alex Rodriguez, when he was actively trying to buy the New York Mets before Steve Cohen came back in and blew him out of the water, he was chastised by a lot of people that said, boy, he really blew it now. When he mentioned that he was in favor of a salary cap in baseball, provided that the two sides could negotiate an agreement that they would work together on creating and sharing new revenues. And I had a lot of people say, oh, he really blew any opportunity he had. Doesn't that make a lot of business sense,
Andy?
Andy?
I think anything that makes business sense in sports is viewed as heretical, because as we know, the color of the fluid that flows through the veins of all sports is green. And until you have some sort of equity, or at least the big guys making most of the money, it will view those that are changing the model as being heretics.
Well, we have a
Marty?
few sports that have, salary cap or some other component. But again, back to baseball, I used to say as long as Marvin Miller was alive, there wouldn't be a salary cap. Now I
Mhm.
say as long as the memory of
Marvin
Marvin
Miller.
Miller is alive, there
Right.
won't be a salary cap. And so I think, as Andy said, if you talk about a baseball, it's a heresy to think about that. And again, you can see this internationally where leagues in Europe, England, and Spain are struggling because they don't have any sort of framework for that, and they're allowing each team. And so you see just a handful of dominant teams. So if you look in the future without some sort of cost controls, you're going to see that. But again, I always say this, it's for some reason owners come into sports, they come in as capitalists, but once they get there they behave as socialists, right? And so suddenly they have this transformation about wanting to do business like that, when prior to that they've wanted to crush every competitor that they've ever had.
And they whack people like me and Marty first when it's not working well, because we can't basically create their dream. I keep thinking back to the number $11.2 million. It's what Walter Haas and the family bought the A's for in 1980. Now you must have how many players in baseball making $11.2 million a year who suck?
Yeah.
And even for inflation, you're talking like, oh yeah, he bought that club. He picked it up for a measly 1.5 billion. Or
So wrapping this up, a couple pandemic questions. Of the the four big leagues, or any other sport that comes to mind, who handled the pandemic the best?
the
Or
guy,
is there no
guy
best?
who's the guy who's bald like you, Adam Silver. Period. End of sentence for me.
Yeah, I think there's two questions there: who handled it best, or who ended up better. Adam Silver could be the commissioner of all sports. I think all three of us might agree on that, and it wouldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah.
Having said that, the NFL bulldozed COVID to the point where they threw so much money at it. They threw so much because there was so much on the line. So when you ask me who handled it best, I would say I think we would agree that the NBA. I think who benefited the most from it, I think it was the NFL, because they just had they put the shield in front of everything. And just like Braveheart said, we're going across the line, try to stop us. And nobody would, and COVID couldn't stop them.
So this thing really exposed baseball's, impending business problem that they have on their hands, which is this next basic agreement. Is there any possibility that either of you see that they almost look at what's happening around them, with stadiums still going to be mostly empty at the beginning of this year, that they can't possibly risk screwing this up? Is there any possibility they won't screw it up going into 2022?
Andy, how many strikes or lockouts did you live through? I don't
A
know.
bunch of them.
Yeah.
you know, we look at our world today, and probably the three of us are pretty damn lucky people. I mean, you just look at some of the numbers we talked about. You go on the streets where we live and go, holy crap, this is really serious. And we are still in the world of sports in a freaking fantasy land in terms of reality. I mean, how do you tell a player that's making $35 million a year, or an owner that bought a team for $100 million and it's worth $5 billion today, that there's a problem? So they're going to fight on structures that were 10 years old. What's going to happen in the future? The economy will determine whether they're going to live or die.
Let me just interject before I get Marty. In other words, it's so toxic now between the two sides that basically, Marty, what you were talking about, that the players insisted upon being paid for 162 games, they refused to allow the schedule to go to 154, start the season 3 to 4 weeks later, be paid for 162, just to be able to play, just so baseball could gain designated hitter and another round of playoffs, and they wouldn't go along with that. That's how bad it is right now.
There were so many common sense things that they could have continued to do from last year that they did. My point is that right now there are more, not just millionaire players younger than ever, multi-millionaires to the point of almost trillionaire players, almost under the age of 30 now than ever before. I see a group who are completely social and self-aware, who understand what they need to do more so than before. And I think they're going to be unified and organized in a way that they're going to bring the heat to baseball. And I think this is going to be a very cold off season, and we're going to have the worst of times because people are going to say, should I buy tickets? When's my game? And anytime you have even the overhang of that, it's bad for the game because it's bad for the finances of the game. And we should all turn and watch fan control football while this happens.
I couldn't have said it better.
As you're cutting us off, Stan, and thank you for that plug, Marty. And it's great to see you. Please say hello to all the Hoyas. You know,
I'm not ready just yet to cut us all off.
Okay. Well, then I want Marty to say hi to all my Hoya friends, because I love Hoyas.
I wanted to ask one last question, and now from the moment he grabbed the hat, I couldn't remember the question. But it had to do with something about sports business, and now I've forgotten it.
I'm sorry, but this Saturday is week 3.
Tell us about fan control football.
So it's the first live sport, arena football.
Right.
Which the fans make every single decision, including real-time play calling in the games. We are now into week 3 of a 6-week season. We play in a bubble outside of Georgia in the Infinite Energy Center, which we've completely customized to look like a Thunderdome. Yep. We have tens of thousands of people from all over the world that are calling plays. And all I would say to anybody that's listening is go to fcf.io or just log on to Twitch. It doesn't cost a penny, and tell me what you think. Because what we've done is created a laboratory for what we like to call immersive sports. People are getting into the game, and their knowledge, as you know, Stan, people who are fans have incredible knowledge.
Yeah.
And now they have a chance to utilize it.
I did remember my question, and not to cut you off there. So my question is this: is this sports' worst nightmare in terms of fans getting too used to not going to ballparks? In other words, are things ever going to get back to normal in the world of sports, where automatically when they say, hey, tickets are now available, that people are going to rush back? Or has a damage been done long haul?
I would give you a first take on that. I think, look, the longer we go in this period of whatever we want to call it, I think we've crossed the chasm where there isn't going back. We've been there that long. I think it's only going forward. And so I think of all the things that have changed during this time, right? Movie theaters are closed, different things, especially in entertainment and sports, fill that void and take up portions of your attention, take up portions of your wallet to do that. And so to say that you were going to go back and we're going to have this, I think that's a huge misunderstanding of the circumstance.
Yep.
And I think it goes forward in a different way. And let me just add, in addition to what Andy's talking about, a fan-controlled football, I think the model that he's looking at and they're working with is something to look in the future, because I think the XFL may do something where they be in a single location. The games are prioritized for TV. Adam Silver has said he really would like his arenas basically to be studios, and that's what they've been for the last year. And I think that's what people are going to do. They're going to consume it on media first, go to the event second, which is the complete opposite of what we had for 50 years.
Right, right.
Now I know why I always used to listen to Marty when he would present at postseason baseball business meetings, because he's one smart person. And I believe that we are talking about the new different, not the new normal. Anytime a person talks to me about the new normal, I said, sorry, done.
The new different, right.
That doesn't mean it's bad.
Right.
So
What I look at is sports is the last town square left in our society.
Yeah.
It's not just that sports has been injured, but that social interaction, which is so important to all of us, our
it's
family,
fractured, yeah.
that has been fractured. I think sports can help us get to the new different, but it is a new model. And if you're not thinking in creative, nimble, agile ways, you are done for.
Is that why gaming, sports betting is so important moving forward, because it addicts people in a different way?
Well, look
And
what happened.
that can be monetized too.
So look what's happened during this time period of stimulus checks and Robinhood and all that. How many, I think there was something, I saw a statistic and a research about 66% of people under the age of 35 who got a stimulus check used it in Wall Street investing over the last year, right? So now we've created a different sort of environment because they're looking for that competition. They're looking for that element to do it. And so anytime you inject these things from external, whether it's stimulus checks or all the Twitch, all these other kind of things, you're going to expect a different outcome. And like Andy said, if you think that you're coming back and you're going to build from 10% to 20 to 50 to 70% fans coming back, I think that's a bad plan. Anybody that's thinking that way probably won't be doing their ownership or their fans, in their best interest.
Marty Conway of Georgetown University Sports Marketing Program. Thank you. Sports Business Program. Andy Dolich of Stanford's Sports Business Program.
Yeah, but I went to American University and I couldn't get
I know, and you work for the Washington Caps. You just gave me a great idea, Marty, what I'm going to do with my next stimulus check, though. I'm going to go out and make a couple baseball parlay bets that are going to pay off huge.
Let's just combine. We'll buy GameStop or something like that.
All right. Guys, let's do this again. I really appreciate it. All right.
Stan, it's always great, Marty. It's wonderful to see you, and say hi to the Georgetown Steps for me. One of my
Just want to
Andy,
remind
it's great
you.
to see you again.
Just want to remind you that Pressbox Live has been brought to you by C3 American Exteriors. Go to their website at c3america.com to get a brand new roof for just the cost of your insurance deductible. Guys, we'll see you soon. Monday night, Ross Grimsley and I will be on with none other than Hal McCoy, Hall of Fame baseball writer and an old acquaintance of Ross Grimsley's from Cincinnati. Good night, everybody.
See you guys. Stay safe in the new different.